Welcome into this week's episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we are here, as always, to talk about all things college basketball all across this country, even with the weather that has disrupted so many games, has disrupted so many fans from enjoying the performances for the people who have been dealing with power outages, hoping that all is well, hoping that if it's not back by now, that it gets back soon for everyone as we continue to deal with the fallout from so much snow and ice all over the country. Did not receive any here where I'm recording from, but it has finally gotten cold here. So we are not in the same boat, but at least the temperature outside is about the same. As we roll through today's show here in the first segment, we're going to talk about the best conference in college basketball. That's right. We're going to make an argument for each of the contenders that is in this mix. Wrote a story for On3 on it during this week. So be sure to go check that out if you're interested in the conversation we have today. In the second segment, we're going to get you the latest on the Charles Bediako situation. Yes, we have to keep talking about it. We've got to get this thing to the finish line. We're also going to look at it from a new angle. Yes, we're going to get you the latest news and notes from it, but we're also going to talk about Alabama and where they stand as a contender. What does it mean for them that they've brought in Charles Bediako in? What does it mean if he's ruled ineligible once his time runs out? So that and more. And then, of course, in the third segment, we'll get you a bracketology update. We'll talk a little bit about the bubble there and then get you out of here with the games of the week. So without further introduction, let's do it. Let's talk about the best conference in college basketball, because this is a fascinating season to do so. Last year, it was the SEC. They ran away. There was really no debate at all. From the non-conference schedule forward, we knew that the SEC was the best in the sport, so much so that jokes started to pop up. Well, the SEC is only 500 in league play. Of course, every conference is 500 in league play as they face each other, but that's how far ahead the SEC was from the competition, that was the only argument that you could present against that case. So a little different debate this year, because the SEC only has one team contending inside the top four seed lines. That's Vanderbilt, who nobody saw coming. Vanderbilt team that has shown flaws in recent weeks. So no one really in the inner circle of title contenders from the SEC at this point, something that we could not have imagined just 12 months ago. Really, it has been dominated by the Big Ten and the Big 12. Of course, Duke gives the ACC representation up there in the elite top tier contenders as well. But what do we make of all of these conferences? We're going to start with the Big 12 and what their case is, because the Big 12 is an interesting one to track. I think that their best case for being the top conference in college basketball this season is the number of true contenders, the amount of teams from that conference that you feel like could win it all. Look, they have 6 teams in the top 15 of the AP poll right now. That's really, really good. I mean, that's taking up over a third of the spots, just as one conference inside the top 15. You've got an undefeated Arizona team that continues to just run over everyone in its path. Number one at both KenPom and the net. Number one overall seed in bracketology. You back that up with teams like BYU, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, and Texas Tech, all of them among the top 16 seeds at bracketology as well. So you've got 6 of the top 16 overall seeds in bracketology right now. Really, if you break it down within those seed lines, there's 6 of the top 13 or 14, depending on how you shape it up. That's how solid the top end of this conference is. That's how many inner circle title contenders they have at this point in the season. So a really scary bunch at the top of the conference. Now, what is the weak spot for this Big 12 if we were to name one? What would open the door for another conference to compete with them for this title? It's pretty obvious. It's the lack of depth that we see. You see, UCF is the only other team from the Big 12 that is currently on the right side of bracketology. They're the only other team. So while you've got 6 inner circle title contenders, you only have one team behind them that's really doing anything. That has dropped their average rating. If you are to just average out all of the teams from the conference and the net rankings, it has hurt them at KenPom in their conference power rankings because, of course, the Baylors and TCUs, while they're good but on the wrong side of the bubble, they don't have the same weight that the 8th, 9th best team in the SEC or the Big Ten has. So that's become the issue that the Big 12 has to overcome here. Now, where do we sit on the Big 12? I think that it is a very, very solid case. I think that they are firmly in the mix for the best conference in college basketball. Because ultimately, what we are going to judge this season on is postseason success. That's where we really determine what the most dominant conference in college basketball was. So if you're the Big 12 and you're going to end up with 6 teams on those top 4 seed lines, well, the chances are you could end up with at least 5 of them reaching the Sweet 16. 5 teams into the Sweet 16 is an incredible feat that would set them up very well to have multiple representatives make it into the Elite 8. And at that point, who's to say they wouldn't have multiple teams make it all the way to the Final Four? That's the kind of strength that you're going to remember for years and years down the line. Remember that year, just like last year. Remember that year that the SEC sent multiple teams to the Final Four after they dominated all season long? This year, you could look at this Big 12 and say, look, do you remember how many Big 12 teams made it to the Elite 8 in the Final Four that year? That's going to be kind of the legacy that this Big 12 is trying to create. Now, the SEC kind of has the inverse argument. Their argument has to be that the depth is what matters. Because their worst team ranks very favorably compared to the worst teams from the Big 12 and the Big 10. Mississippi State is the lowest ranked team. They just picked up a decent win. They just got themselves firmly into the top 100. The worst teams in the Big 12 and the Big 10, they're not really close to the top 100 at this point in the net or KenPom. So you've got a big advantage there. If we're going to average out how good these teams are, the SEC is going to get itself back into the mix, potentially be the number 1 conference, if that's how we evaluate things. Unfortunately, for the SEC, the downside that they have, the issue that they face, is that there's really no title contender. The SEC at this point is, in terms of the odds, I would say looking to get one team into the Sweet 16. Because Vanderbilt is really the only team, as I said, that's going to land in the top 4 seeds if the season were to end today. If we were to move Selection Sunday up. So that's a problem. You can't have so few teams be there in those top seeds that get the preferential matchups, that get preferential locations in their seeding. So it's going to be interesting to see. Can some of these teams get hot down the stretch? Can they enter that mix? Can they knock some of these Big 12 and Big 10 teams as well out of those spots and reclaim some of the top seeds overall? That's going to matter a lot because the top end has to be a big piece of this. Yes, it's great that all of your teams are somewhat in the mix for NCAA tournament contention. It's great that you could put double digit teams into the field again. But if they all lose in the first weekend, people are going to question your strength more than they respect your strength. That's going to be the dilemma that the SEC faces now. I would say it's also very likely that they do get at least one team into the Sweet 16 based off of just the path that they see forward, upsets that we're going to see across the bracket. There are some really good teams in the SEC, but again, no inner circle title contenders. I don't think that they have someone who's going to win it all who's coming out of this conference. So can they be the best conference if that's the case? The Big Ten, they've got an interesting case as well to be made. The Big Ten can argue really here that the numbers are what matters. There should be a ton of respect for the Big Ten because they have the most projected teams in the field. They have not only 5 teams currently inside the AP polls top 15, so right behind the Big 12. They deserve just as much respect here. They also have teams that are on the right side of the bubble. A big group of them, really. Now, here's what's going to matter for the Big Ten. How much do those second tier teams, maybe even third tier, because I look at Iowa as maybe the only team that's in the second tier. We talked about this when we broke down the conferences as they stood entering league play. But Iowa is the team that's really slated themselves in the field above this group of bubble teams that is all beating each other up down the stretch. Your hope is that the Big Ten is a strong enough conference that even as those teams do beat each other up and try to improve their own resumes against each other, that they all still end up on the right side of things at the time that it's all said and done. We'll talk more about the bubble in the third segment here today, but that's going to be the interesting dilemma that the Big Ten is going to face, because they don't really face any of the big weaknesses, except that if we look at the tiers of depth, that's where they get in trouble. You see, I talked about the SEC and how Mississippi State was far above the worst teams from the Big 12 and the Big 10. Well, the worst team in the Big 12 is still way ahead of not just one, because here's the thing. In the SEC, Mississippi State is a little bit of an outlier. They're kind of below the other teams by 15, 20 spots in those analytic rankings. In the Big 12, same thing. Utah is well below the rest of the pack. In the Big 10, there's a group of 3, Maryland, Penn State, and Rutgers, who are all closer to 150 than they are even 100. That's an issue. You've got 3 teams, a pretty significant percentage of your conference that is just completely off the picture, that is an active negative if you lose to them. So they're adding no value to you in any of these rankings, in any of these comparisons. So it's the bottom of the Big Ten that is hurting them if we're debating who the best conference in college basketball is. Now, which conference deserves the title right now of the best? I think it's really tough to crack. I lean towards, at this point in time, the Big Ten, because I do think that it matters if you're one of those top 10 teams, if you're one of those 5 teams that I mentioned in the top 15 of the AP poll, the fact that you're having to face night in and night out, not just the other top teams, but other teams that are in the NCAA tournament picture. I think that that's a tougher path. I think that that provides more challenges than it does if you're a Big 12 team that, yes, you still have to face big time, top 15 marquee matchups. But then you get a little bit more of a night off when you face the other teams in the conference than what the Big 10 has been getting this season. So right now, I am leaning towards, just hedging, very slightly towards the Big Ten being the stronger conference between those two. And I think that the SEC comes in third, even though, like I said, if you go to KenPom and you type in the best conference, the SEC is what it's going to spit back because of how it averages out. The computers love to average this out. And in that case, the SEC has the most in the middle. But the top end has to matter. That's why I think that the Big Ten is currently the best team or the best conference, because I do think that it's easier to rule out the bottom of the conference than it is to rule out the middle. Those three teams, yes, an eyesore for the conference. But they're also, as long as they don't pull off big upsets against your top teams, not really part of the picture. The Big Ten, after all, has more teams in it than some of the other conferences. So it will be interesting to see how this all unfolds, because I think that the Big 12 can certainly jump right back up there and snatch that away. They do have the best team right now in Arizona. That gives you a big kind of boost coming into this conversation. But I don't want to exit this conversation without mentioning the ACC, because in my article, I gave the ACC a side honor. Are they in the conversation? No, they are not in this conversation. They don't really check any of the boxes. They've got teams that at the bottom of the conference are bad. So they've got the flaws that the Big Ten has. They've got the flaws that the SEC has that, well, only one, maybe two of your teams are going to make it into those top four seeds. So you just don't have the depth at the top. Not enough inner circle title contenders to be up there. It's really just Duke in terms of the inner circle. And then you've got Virginia, who might push to make a case in that top 16. And then you look at the middle of the conference, and they've got a decent middle of the conference, but it's not going to put them in the mix to have the most bids into the NCAA tournament the way that the Big Ten can, the way that the SEC has the potential to do. So ACC, you're not in the mix for the best conference in college basketball right now, but you do win the most improved award, because the ACC, we've talked about it from the offseason all the way through, the investment made this year in improving, in getting back to where they should be, because they should be in this conversation. The investment from the coaching ranks to the rosters, the NIL that was put into this, the investment just by the league to really ramp everything up, all aspects of this conference, through the roof. Things have gotten so much better just over the course of a few months than they were at the end of last season. Because for multiple years, it was Duke, it was Clemson in the field, and then we would wait and see what happened to UNC. That was it. And then Louisville got back on track last year. You saw investment pay off. And I think that encouraged the NC States, the Virginias, everyone else across this conference to put their money where their mouth is, get back to being one of the top conferences. And so they do get a mention here because they're really putting in the effort that they hadn't been in past years to get back into the mix, to be a real part of this conversation in the next few years. When we come back on the other side, we'll be talking about Charles Bediako, his situation at Alabama, the latest in that court ruling, and the latest it means for the Alabama roster right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in here on 3 True Values. We're talking about Charles Bediako and his ongoing court case against the NCAA. Of course, received a preliminary injunction that would last long enough for him to play against Tennessee over the weekend. Well, that has been extended through next week. He gets 2 additional games added because of the weather. Yes, that's right. One of the members who was needed to be present as part of this ongoing court case was unable, because of the snow, because of the ice, to travel to make it from wherever it was that they were to Tuscaloosa. So just another just incredible wrinkle. Can't make this stuff up. People felt like okay, yes, he played one game. He got in there on Saturday. He made an impact. He wasn't a star player by any means, but he definitely played a big role for Alabama. And that's kind of what Charles Bediako was before when he first played with the Crimson Tide. He was the guy who kind of cleaned up all the messes. Just be big, be strong, set hard screens, get to the basket, box out, dive on the floor when you need to, block a couple of shots when they come towards you, hold your ground. Just do all of the things that are needed to mix it up in the paint and keep things clean for the guards. He did that so well on that Brandon Miller team that had great success for Alabama. So to see him come back in here, I'm not sure what the expectation really was. I think that we got so caught up on whether or not he should be playing that I don't think we even discussed, much less here, but I don't think I talked to even Alabama fans about what they expected from him on the court. But regardless, we've gotten about what we would have gotten if he had continued his college career. So interesting to see that it's not by any means like he went to the professional ranks and came back and is just dominating, 20 and 12 and just unstoppable force. No, that's not the case. He's still the same player that he was. Maybe he's a little bit stronger, a little bit smarter as a basketball player, but look, it's pretty much the same basketball player, the same Charles Bediako that you're getting out on the floor. But that's an impactful basketball player. That's a player that matters for your team. Make life easier for your guards. Make life easier for your other bigs. Alabama's a team that, look, if we look at that center rotation, Aiden Sherrill, yes, has taken a big step forward, has started to come into his own. But he's not a guy who can play 40 minutes a night. He needs those rest breaks. You look at Noah Williamson. That looks like a swing and a miss at this point in the portal. He just has not been able to adjust his game, the speed that Alabama wants to play with. He has not been able to adjust to the overall style of SEC basketball. Some of the physicality has seemed to give him some issues. He just feels out of place against these big teams in big matchups. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that. I feel bad sometimes talking about these guys and being like, no, he's just not. Look, that's not even to say that other power conference basketball he couldn't have adjusted to. It's just the way that Alabama plays, the way that some of their matchups go. He's not suited for that style. And I think that there was hope that they could kind of get him into a little bit better shape. They could get him into the flow of things, that he would figure it out over the course of an offseason. It just has not clicked. It has not worked. And so it seems like that one was a miss for this staff. That means that Taylor Bowen has had to play more on the interior. Of course, they had a reclassified freshman who they brought in. Well, he deals with an injury. Now he's out for the season. So the reason that they brought Charles Bediako in the first place was not to try to create some incredible advantage over the rest of the field to just make themselves the number one team in the polls. It was to fill a need. They are running out of center minutes, at least valuable center minutes to go around, because Taylor Bowen is miscast as a center. He is a power forward. He needs the space to roam on the outside of the court. His offense comes more downhill and spot up than it does from posting on the interior or even rolling to the rim off of screens. A real slim frame to be doing that. So Alabama needed center help, and they went out and they got it. Now, very controversial how they went out and got it. But the latest with Charles Bediako is that it has been extended, so we're going to get to see him for a couple more games before he gets back in front of a judge. But in the meantime, the NCAA did request that Judge Roberts recuse himself from this case. The judge who had approved the preliminary injunction, who had also signed off that the NCAA could not punish Alabama or Charles Bediako for this process that they are going through. They cannot have any kind of repercussions for playing him during the injunction. Because, well, the reason that the NCAA wanted him recused is because he is a donor to the University of Alabama, an active part of that university. Of course, he is an Alabama graduate, but as is every judge in that district. Obviously, being in Tuscaloosa, it makes sense that a lot of them went to the University of Alabama and then started their practices there. So you're not going to get a judge that doesn't have some ties to Alabama. But the NCAA argued that as an active donor to the university, he did have an additional conflict of interest that should force him to recuse himself. Now, as the court system works, he has a duty, if that is even a possibility, that the fact that he donates to this university will impact the way that he views the basketball team, he has to recuse himself. And so he has. He's granted that request. He has recused himself. New judge has taken over in that same district, yes. A judge who has a history on Alabama basketball cases. This new judge was part of the process when Darius Miles was convicted of capital murder from that same Alabama basketball team. So a very interesting side bar plot twist, whatever you want to call it here, to this whole situation. The judge who they do replace Judge Roberts with has a history ruling against Alabama basketball players. Of course, that is a positive sign because it shows that this new judge can be impartial based on just the evidence, based on what is heard in the case. It does make this more complicated, though, because it really felt like Judge Roberts, whether it was through bias or through his beliefs on what he was reading, what was put in front of him, in favor of granting Charles Bediako eligibility. That was the vibe you got from the preliminary injunction. With this new judge, it's unclear. This new judge could uphold NCAA rules. We haven't really gotten a good grasp on what this new judge actually thinks about the case because they're still being brought up to speed in the process. We will find out before the hearing, which will determine if Charles Bediako can play for the remainder of the season or if he suddenly becomes ineligible again. So we've got another week, and then we're going to rule out Charles Bediako, or we're going to continue playing with him for the rest of the season. I think it's interesting from Alabama's point of view, though, the need to prepare for life without him. Because like I said, they're short bodies at the center position. Bringing in Charles Bediako was an admission that Noah Williamson is not going to cut it in these minutes that they need him to play. So what do they do now? How do you prepare for life without Bediako? Do you make him go head-to-head with guys like Williamson? Continue to teach Sherelle? Work with Bull Bowen? Is the idea that if Bediako is around, if Bediako is playing in that mix, that hopefully things can rub off. They can see some of the traits that he brings. He can talk them through some of the things that he's learned even since being at Alabama. He has an understanding of this Alabama system that even some of them don't have as first-year guys in the system. He's a guy who played 2 years and then is coming back in his third season at Alabama. So I'm not sure what this means for Alabama. What I do know is that they are teetering at this point in the season. They got a big win in the midweek slate. Don't get me wrong. That was massive for them to pick up. Again, Charles Bediako playing a significant role. But if they lose Bediako down the stretch of the season, I do have concerns about them at that center position and what it will do as teams are able more and more to load up on LeBaron Philon. I think that this is an Alabama team with a lot of talent, but some fatal flaws that could keep it from rising into the contender conversation. I think that they're clearly an NCAA tournament team. They're clearly one of the top teams in the SEC, but I'm not sure if they can win a postseason tournament. I'm not sure if they can win deep into the NCAA tournament the way that the roster is currently constructed, minus Charles Bediako. Of course, it's going to bring controversy one way or the other. If they do win, everyone is going to question them doing it with their center in the mix. So, really, a no-win situation, but it's better to be in a no-win situation where you win than a no-win situation where you lose. I think that more and more coaches around the country, after the initial shock, after the initial backlash for this move, are starting to feel that. Even Stephen Pearl, Alabama's biggest rival down there in Auburn, his latest comments on this are way tamped down from where they were earlier on in the process. It went from how could they do this to, look, I totally get how they could do this. We're coaches. Our job is, within the rules that we're given, to win. And if you're told that this rule doesn't actually apply, why would you not attempt to go down that path? So, look, this is all a mess. I'm not sure if the NCAA can or cannot clean this up at this point, but we're going to have to get to a point where we clear this up one way or another. You're already seeing more and more coaches. Look, even Dabo Swinney is calling for a collective bargaining agreement to make these athletes employees. That's how far we have come. That's how far removed we are from the good old days that the NCAA and a big chunk of the fan base, and I get it, clinging on to the good old days. But at some point, holding on to something that is no longer the case is only harming the present and the future of college basketball and college sports as a whole. There's going to have to be drastic changes that are made one way or the other. Somebody's finally got to stop this stalwart that we've been in for years now with the NCAA and the lack of ability to enforce rules. Where that goes, we'll see. How quickly can people in positions of power potentially take their hands off of that power in order to serve the greater good? We will see. That is yet to be determined. When we come back on the other side, we're going to talk a little bit about the bubble and then get you out of here with the games of the week, as we do every week right here on Three True Values. Welcome back in here on Three True Values. Want to talk a little bit about the bubble before we get you to the games of the week. Now, we're not going to go in depth on specific teams that are on the bubble today, because I've got an interesting topic that's been kind of weighing on me as I fill out these bracketology updates, because the bubble's not moving. There's just really not much up and down from the last four buys all the way down to the next four out. And that's usually where we see teams rocket up the board with a big win, fall down with a bad loss. In the field, out of the field, where do we rank them this week? It's just not been the case, because I feel like no one is capitalizing on opportunities. It's a lot of 1-1 weeks. It's a lot of, oh, big win, but a bad loss in the same stretch. Nobody is just grabbing this and running away with it. I look at a team like LSU that should be well off the bubble. If you go by the analytics, they're still hanging around because there's no one to replace them. There is a significant drop off from the bubble down to the next tier of teams, and I'm not really sure what we're going to do with it. It has given these teams ample opportunity to find themselves on the right side, but they're really struggling to separate from each other. We saw Texas is really the last team that we saw leap into this conversation. And once they got up there, they fell in line with the rest. It's win, loss, win, loss. One week we think, oh, for sure, they're going to be in the last four in. Oh, well, they took a loss, so let's slot them into the first four out. Oh, well, now they're in for sure. They might even go up into the regular field. They might get one of the last four bye spots. So, nope, but they lost. Now let's put them into the last four in. Like, that's been the case. And that's across the board for all of these teams. Even the Mountain West teams that are in the mix. New Mexico, stringing together wins, but it's big win that improves their analytics. And then it's that win wasn't very impressive. They actually fell in the analytics, even though they got the win. What do we do with that? That's been the case now for 3 weeks, probably, that the bubble has just been real stagnant. Something's got to shake loose. We've got over a month left in this season. I am sure that somebody is going to string together a great week. Somebody's going to string together 2 weeks where they go 3-1. Something's going to happen to shake this loose. But right now, man, it's kind of ugly on the bubble. Things are not just real nip and tuck. Let's figure this out. We've got great candidates here. There's some good candidates. There's teams that definitely deserve to be in the NCAA tournament field, but they're not making it obvious. They're not going out there and making a big statement. Yes, this is our place. They've got time left, but the longer that this goes on, the closer all of these resumes all shrink together. And it becomes really hard to get out of that pack because you've got more and more data as things are shrinking tight together. That means even a big win, yeah, it's going to boost you. But you've already created the situation that you sit in. So it's only one win in the mix of 25, 26 results at that point. We'll see how it all fades out. Like I said, somebody's going to have to just reach up and grab this. It's going to happen. Where it happens, when it happens, that's what we'll continue to track as we keep updating bracketology at On3, as we keep talking through the results here on 3 True Values. Let's get you out of here with the games of the week, as we do every week. We're going to start with Thursday night. We've got Illinois against Washington. That's an interesting one because, of course, Illinois continues to rise up. They're in the 2 seed conversation now against a Washington team that is on the outside of the bubble conversation. They are not in the mix for a bubble spot right now, but they could get themselves up into there. And they've got Hans Steinbeck, who is a really interesting prospect as well. On Friday, Michigan State, Michigan, nowhere else that we could go for this, playing on Tom Izzo's birthday, a rivalry matchup that everyone is going to want to tune in for. Michigan going through an absolute gauntlet right now in the Big Ten. They come off of a game that they win against Nebraska. Now they face Michigan State on the road. So good luck with that. Kansas hosts BYU on Saturday. We get to see the presumed number 1 and number 2 picks in this year's NBA draft go head to head as long as Darren Peterson is healthy and ready to go. AJ DeMonsa has had some big performances recently. Can Peterson respond with a big performance head to head of his own and get himself right up there in the conversation for that number 1 overall pick? Florida and Alabama face off on Sunday, a rare Sunday lineup for the SEC. We're going to see that as the calendar flips to February. So big matchup, 2 teams that are on the outside looking in of those top 16 overall seeds, but Florida looks like the team more likely to just jump up and grab it. Charles Bediako will be present in that game after the latest injunction. Texas Tech against Kansas. This is another one of these marquee top of the conference matchups in the Big 12. We talked about them in that first segment. So many of these that we're going to see, and it's going to determine how these teams are seeded against each other when we get down to the end of the season. On Monday, a very light slate of college basketball, but it gives us an opportunity to watch St. Louis. Of course, Robbie Avila is a fan favorite, has been for a few years now across college basketball. So check in with him, check in on this St. Louis team that is in the top 25, that continues to put together big results, looks like a lock to make the NCAA tournament, could make the A-10 a 2-bid league even if they weren't able to get the job done in the conference tournament. And that game is on Tuesday. On Monday is the Texas Tech Kansas game, which leads us to Wednesday, which is the last day before we will meet again here and do a 3 True Values episode. We've got Houston against UCF. Big one there for UCF. As we mentioned, the only team in the Big 12 that's really on the right side of that bubble conversation, but isn't an inner circle title contender. So can Houston close the deal there? Can they get another big win to add to their resume, get themselves back into the 1 seed conversation if they can keep stringing together results? Thank you for tuning in here on Three True Values. We will be back next week. We will be on, hopefully, with Jamie Shaw talking recruiting on Tuesday. An update coming to the On3 2026, or excuse me, the Rivals 2026 recruiting rankings. So we'll walk through some of the teams, the players that have gone up and down the board there. And then on Thursday, we will be right back here with Three True Values. We will be taking some mailbag questions. So if you've got questions about college basketball over the next week, please hit me up. Twitter, Instagram, text message, call me, whatever. If you can get through to me, email me, however you can get to me, leave it in the comments. We'll try to check those as well. Your questions on college basketball over this next week, happy to answer them as always. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Please continue to like, share, subscribe, get this out to the people as we get closer and closer to March Madness. More bubble conversations coming, more bracketology conversations on the way. We've got so much to talk about. It's almost February. That means that we're closing in on the home stretch of this season. Thanks once again for tuning in. We'll see you next week.